Hello all, thanks for joining us this evening. I'll just give it a few minutes whilst people join. You can see the number is slowly creeping up. So we've got 120 so far on the call, which is fantastic. Now reached over 200. Fantastic to have so many of you joining us this evening. Give it a little moment more, we're up to about 230. Give it a moment more to allow people to join. Okay, I think got a good number there, so we'll get going up to about over 240 of you joining, which is fantastic. So firstly, just to introduce myself, so I'm Simon Grieveson. I'm Assistant Director of Research at Prostate Cancer UK. So my role at the charity is to oversee our investment into research, which really helps to advance our understanding of prostate cancer and to support research that delivers new innovations in how we diagnose the disease, and also new ways to treat the disease, both when it's localized contained within the prostate and also when it's spread around the body. Thank you all for joining us this evening to our Ideas to Impact webinar. We'll be talking a bit about the role of MRI in detecting prostate cancer and whether we can improve upon it. Before we get going, there's just a few bits of housekeeping which I need to do, if I may. So firstly, just to say that this webinar is being recorded. We can't see any of you or hear any of you, so you don't need to worry about whether your camera is on or not. It will just be the speakers that can be seen and heard. You may see at the bottom of the screen there's a button that says Q&A. Please do put your questions in there and add your questions in throughout the various talks that we have, and then we'll visit them at the end of your session to answer some of those questions all together. What I must say though, please do not share any personal health information in your questions that you raise. We're unable to address any specifics of our individuals' health situations. If you do want to talk to someone about your own specific circumstances, then I'd highly recommend speaking to our specialist nurses. So we run a specialist nurses service where there's highly skilled people that you can speak to over the phone or over email or even by WhatsApp to talk about your specific case. So move on to this evening, just to give you a run through of how things will be going. So firstly, we'll be speaking with Alan Roper. I'm talking about his experience of being diagnosed with prostate cancer and his involvement in a particular trial called PROMISE. We've then also been joined today by three excellent researchers based at the University College London, Veeru Kasivisvanathan, Alex Ng, and Aqua Asif. And they'll be talking about the work on two studies they've been working on called GLIMPSE and called PRIME, which is aiming to see if we can make MRI scans faster, cheaper, and less invasive, so they're more accessible. And then, as I mentioned, there'll be time at the end for questions. So if I'd like to introduce Alan, thank you for joining us this evening. Perhaps we could start off, you could just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and about your personal experience of being diagnosed with prostate cancer. Well, I think you're on mute, Alan.
Yeah, I'm Alan Roper, and I was diagnosed with prostate cancer 8 years ago after having regular PSA checks with my local surgery. I got on one occasion I got the dreaded call and asked to go back and have another PSA check, which I did. I was also given a rectal examination, which didn't highlight anything sinister. But my doctor, being vigilant, thankfully, referred me to the urology department at Basingstoke Hospital, where she suggested that I should have further diagnostic tests. This I did, and when I went for my my appointment, the clinical nurse specialists gave me two options. I had the rectal examination again, and she said that was all fine. And she said that I can do a transrectal biopsy on you today, although you may well be interested in something else that I've got to talk about, and that was a trial. So I asked her what the difference was between the transrectal biopsy and the trial. And in terms of reliability, she suggested to me that the trial would give probably a 90% accurate diagnosis, whereas the transrectal biopsy would only be something like 55–60%. So I decided I'd go on the trial. I didn't think there was much of a decision to make there. The trial lasted over a period of about 9 months. And during that time, I had an MRI scan, and I also had a transrectal biopsy and a new transperineal biopsy, because they wanted to do the comparison between the transrectal and the transperineal and the MRI to see what stories each were telling and whether they were telling the same story. So eventually I was called in to have an appointment for my results, and I was told that cancer had been found in my prostate. Remarkably, the transrectal biopsy was negative, but the MRI scan and the transperineal biopsy both proved positive. So, yes, the trial had been successful. So I was then obviously given a pile of information to take away with me, which was very difficult to go through. But eventually I went back and spoke with the consultant. He took me through the MRI scan and the results, which indicated where the problems lied within the prostate. Something which was not just new to me, but new to them as well, because it was a trial and it was developing. So I had a long conversation with him about the possibility of treatments and what was right for me and what wasn't. And eventually I suggested to him that I'd like to try brachytherapy. So because Basingstoke don't do any procedures like that, he referred me to Guildford. And I attended there fairly quickly afterwards. And we agreed that brachytherapy was going to be suitable for me. So I went down the brachytherapy route. And strangely enough, I saw the surgeon yesterday that performed the brachytherapy on me 7 years ago. And he was very pleased to see the way things were going. Absolutely.
That's good to hear that the treatment has been going well.
Yes.
Fantastic to hear.
Yeah.
So the trial that you mentioned there, I believe, the PROMISE study,
Yeah,
which is one of the pivotal studies which led to the introduction of multiparametric MRI in the diagnostic
that's right.
pathway for prostate cancer. You slightly alluded to it, but what made you decide to take part in the trial? And I guess looking back now, how do you feel about being part of such a pivotal trial, which has changed the way that men are diagnosed?
Yeah, well, it was at the appointment with the hospital on the first one there, when given the option of a transrectal biopsy then and there versus a trial which was going to be a little bit more extensive in terms of its pathway, but the results, the accuracy of the difference was absolutely what swayed me. Why would I want to have a a transrectal biopsy when the success rate or the reliability of the results was 55 to 65%, when I could go on a trial where the reliability was going to be in the 90s? I would much prefer to know yes rather than maybe, and that's why I went that way.
I mean, sounds entirely sensible
Yeah.
decision to make. And I guess kind of looking back, how do you feel about being involved in the study now that it's helping so many men, the introduction of MRI?
Well, I was at a conference yesterday, and one of the clinicians there said that he thought that the MRI scanning for prostate cancer had changed the diagnostic pathway for men remarkably. And I'm very proud to have been part of that pioneering trial, if you like. And another way of looking at it from my point of view is on a very personal level, because had I chosen, excuse me, had I chosen to go for the transrectal biopsy on the day I was at hospital, I might not be here talking to you people now, because it might not, well, it didn't identify that I had tumors, whereas the MRI scan, thank goodness, showed it had. And the fortunate thing about it was that mine was diagnosed as early stage. So it was easily dealt with rather than it being more aggressive or advanced.
Yeah. I guess something that we know about prostate cancer, that there are certain risk factors that might increase someone's risk of getting prostate cancer. So that could be, for men over 50, for Black men and men with a family history, particularly a father or a brother, have an increased risk. Why do you think it's so important that men know about their risk of prostate cancer?
Well, my dad had a problem with it, and that's probably what prompted me to go for the PSA tests when I did regularly. However, at that time, I didn't know that there was a family history risk. I just did it because I know my dad had a problem. So I think that if you don't know what the risks are, then you can't plan around the risks. You don't know what choices to make. And if risks are advertised more and more men take notice of them, then there's a very, very good chance that more men will be caught with early stage prostate cancer than aggressive or advanced.
I should probably take this moment to mention to people about the risk checker that we have on our website. If people would like to look at that and know a bit more about those risk factors and their own individual risk, it's a very brilliant, easy tool to use. Takes 30 seconds, and it provides really, really valuable information about knowing your risk of prostate cancer. Thank you so much, Alan, for your time. We'll have questions at the end. I'm sure there may be some where you might contribute, but just for the purpose of time, we will need to move on. So I'd like to introduce our three speakers that we've got today. So Veeru, Alex, and Aqua, who are going to be talking a bit about the PRIME and the GLIMP study that they have been leading. So we've spoken and we covered there with Alan about the PROMISE trial and how that led to the introduction of multiparametric MRI in how we diagnose prostate cancer, and that's been such a critical innovation in how we're diagnosing the disease. But I guess, can we improve upon that? And that's what we're here to find out today. So just as a reminder throughout the talks, please do keep putting your questions in the Q&A section, and we'll come to those if we can do at the end. But yeah, very pleased to hand over to Aqua, who'll be starting things off.
Thank you very much, Simon. Let me share my slides. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can see it, Simon? Cool, awesome. So I'm Dr. Aqua Asif. I'm an honorary research fellow at UCL, and I'm also an academic foundation doctor with a key interest in improving prostate cancer diagnosis. Thank you very much for tuning in. So I'll be giving an introduction and background to the two studies outlined here. But first, I'd like to talk about how things used to be. As Alan mentioned, the new pathway that he took part in. Initially, what men used to do is they would present to primary care and then have their DRE, which is an intimate examination, as well as a PSA. And if these were abnormal, they would then get referred to secondary care for a TRAS biopsy, which unfortunately led to a lot of clinically insignificant cancer being overdiagnosed, as well as being an invasive procedure, which was costly. And a lot of these biopsies were actually unnecessary. Now, because of studies like PROMISE and PRECISION, this pathway is now replaced with a multiparametric MRI instead, avoiding the overdiagnosis that we used to see with TRAS biopsies. The pathway is now, if your multiparametric MRI is normal, you don't need to go for biopsies, which is an invasive procedure, and we can avoid them. If, however, your MRI shows up, with a lesion and it's abnormal, you will now get systematic and plus-minus targeted biopsies, which is focused on the lesion that was seen on your MRI, whereas it used to be finding a needle in the haystack with your TRAS biopsy. So this has now led to improved diagnosis. And now, due to studies like PROMISE and PRECISION, the use of MRI is well established, not only in the UK, but across the world. It's been implemented in the UK, America, EAU, all across every guideline. MRI is now gold standard. However, unfortunately, the demand outstrips the supply. The most recent year that we have data for is 2019, and it stated that less than 2/3 of the men who needed a prostate MRI got one, which is obviously a huge, huge issue. Therefore, we need to come up with ways to how we can streamline this. How can we widen accessibility and make sure that every man who needs one can get one? We need to think of ways that we can make this faster, more accessible, and more cost-effective. And for these two reasons, we have designed the PRIME study, which we will talk about later in this talk. However, with considering this, while we're considering making it more cost-effective and shorter to allow for more men to get scans, we are also worried about ensuring that there's high quality of these scans. Not every car is equal, and this can be the same for MRI machines. This is not the best car, hopefully, you can agree with me, and this would be a low-quality car. Whereas, I hope you agree that a Porsche is 5 out of 5 stars. Thus, we need to make sure that we're maintaining high quality too when we try to streamline our MRI imaging. And this was the purpose and why we looked into the GLIMP study as well. And that was a brief introduction as to why we need to do the PRIME study and the GLIMP study. That was a short introduction. I hope that was okay. Alex, I'd like to introduce you now.
Thank you, Aqua. Good evening, everyone. My name's Alex. I'm an academic doctor working at University College London and the Royal Free Hospital. I'd now like to talk to you about the GLIMPSE study and the work we've been doing over the last few years on prostate MRI quality. So I'd like to use this image and this slide here to draw your attention to the importance of quality. Those of you at home tuning in this evening, I'd like to ask you to take your best guess of what you think this image on the left is from your opinion. Is it A, a cloudy summer sky, B, a flower, C, a butterfly wing, or D, a Picasso masterpiece? And we'll reveal the results shortly. So we asked the exact same question on social media to over 170 people, and these included prostate cancer specialists, urologists, radiologists, and clinicians. And the results on the screen shown to you in the center of your screen show a number of things. Firstly, there's a broad variety in the answers chosen, and there was no definitive answer to what the image was. And this draws parallels to the importance of quality. The image on the bottom left of your screen shows the true answer. We know that this is an image of a flower, and the image we showed you initially was a vague, blurry, low-quality image. And this is analogous to the importance of prostate MRI quality. I'd now like to show you two examples of prostate MRIs. On the top of your screen is a good quality image, and on the bottom of your screen is a poor or low quality image. The good quality image at the top is one we call of optimal diagnostic quality. We can see that the prostate MRI demonstrates the prostate gland very clearly. The image is crisp on all of the sequences shown. And even when we introduce the contrast or the dye sequence in the final image, we can see the prostate gland lighting up where there are suspicious areas. On the other hand, on the bottom of your screen, we have an example of a poor quality image, or one that is non-diagnostic. We can see the image is blurry, nothing's clearly defined, and there is lots of artifacts in this image due to rectal air or air in the back passage. All of the 8 sequences here are affected, and even when we introduce the contrast sequence in the final image, you can see that nothing is lighting up, and due to this poor quality, it's very difficult to interpret anything at all. So prostate MRI quality has been something we've been looking at for the last few years. As Aqua mentioned, some work we did about 5 years ago in 2018 called the Precision Study, which was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, was pivotal in introducing the MRI diagnostic pathway. We demonstrated in this trial the superiority, or that MRI and MRI-targeted biopsies are better than the previous standard. And this led to international guideline changes and was the first major development in the way that prostate cancer was diagnosed in over 30 years. As part of that trial, we looked at prostate image quality, and we developed something called the PQAL scoring system. This is the first scoring system that's ever been developed that looks and assesses prostate image MRI quality, and we used this to look back at the MRIs that took part in the Precision Study. In 2018, when we did this, we found that just over a fifth of scans that took part were of optimal diagnostic quality, and in total, about 60% of the scanners were of adequate diagnostic quality, and this was back in 2018. So looking at those results, we knew at the time that not all of the MRI scans that were being performed were the best or optimal diagnostic quality. And when we designed the PRIME study, which Veeru will talk about shortly, we knew that we had to ensure that all scans were of top-notch quality. To do this, we performed a quality control phase for the study, which was called GLIMPSE, which led to the publication that you can see in the bottom left of your screen. And this was really important because of what we were looking at in the PRIME study. We wanted to ensure that any differences we detected were due to the sequence we were looking at in particular, and not being limited by the quality of scans themselves. The GLIMPSE study was the quality control phase of the PRIME study. And in this study, PRIME, it was an open invitation to any center around the world performing prostate MRIs. A total of 66 centers from 22 countries, and I'm sure you can agree this is a global study, expressed an interest to take part in PRIME. We invited these centers to submit images for us to assess the quality, and 41 centers across 18 countries took part. Phase 1 was our initial assessment, where we assessed the baseline quality of these scanners around the world. And we demonstrated that just a third of scans around the world were of optimal diagnostic quality. We then provided feedback to the MRIs that didn't perform as well. We gave them basic recommendations to improve their quality through the MRI protocols, and then centers were then invited to resubmit modified images for us to reassess. In phase 2, we then reassessed all of these images, and we were able to demonstrate that we improved the quality of the proportion of scanners achieving optimal diagnostic quality from just a third to 97%. And the proportion of scanners not of optimal diagnostic quality decreased from about 68% to only 3% of scanners. And these scanners that we weren't able to optimize were limited due to their age and not many other factors. And in terms of the recommendations we were providing to improve the quality of scanners, these were really basic modifications, such as changing the way the scan is performed by a few seconds, or even changing sequences by a few millimeters. And the GLIMPSE study, which was eventually published a few months ago, was a global overview and the first of its kind to assess the quality of prostate MRI images around the world. And in total, 36 centers across 17 countries took part in the entire study. So the importance of prostate MRI quality is very important. We've been able to demonstrate that small changes, like those changing parameters by a few millimeters or a few seconds, can significantly improve prostate MRI quality, and we've demonstrated this on a global basis. We've been able to also demonstrate that these improvements can be made at no additional cost to centers. We've been able to improve quality for free. And evidence has shown that good and optimal diagnostic quality images are important in order for us to be able to detect prostate cancer, in terms of the accuracy for us to stage prostate cancer, the ability for us to upstage cancer after radical prostatectomy, and also influences our decisions and ability to confidently predict whether or not we'll be able to nerve spare during radical prostatectomy. And this is important in order to be able to ensure that men are able to preserve their erectile function. So that's a brief overview of the GLIMPSE study and the work we've been performing in prostate MRI quality. And I'd now like to hand over to Veeru, who is an associate professor of urology at UCL and also a consultant urologist. Over to you, Veeru.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining this evening. Let me introduce myself. My name is Veeru Kasivisvanathan. I'm an associate professor of urology at University College London and consultant urologist, performing the diagnosis and treatment of patients with prostate cancer. And I'll share some slides with you. First of all, really, just to thank Prostate Cancer UK and the John Black Charitable Foundation for supporting the work that we're talking about today. And without that support, it wouldn't have been possible to run these studies. So thank you. Let's talk about the PRIME study. We've been building up to it. We've spoken about how the pathway has changed with MRI. And we've spoken about the quality control phase of where we set the study up. And now we're going to try and achieve our vision of allowing every man who needs an MRI to get a high quality one. So I thought I'd try and break down what the difference is between the standard MRI scan and the streamlined scan that we're looking at investigating in the PRIME study. So what we see on the screen is the standard type of MRI, which is a multiparametric MRI, which comprises 3 parts. The whole scan takes about 30 to 40 minutes, and nowadays about 30 minutes in most places. And the third part of the scan involves a contrast injection. So that means a small needle in the arm with a dye injected into the body to help light up suspicious areas on the prostate. When you give contrast, because it's an injection, there does need to be a doctor in the vicinity in case there's an allergic reaction. Of course, allergic reactions are very, very rare, but you do need someone to be present just in case. There's the picture of the contrast injection being given. And when we take away that contrast injection, we're left with what's called a biparametric MRI. You can usually take around 10 minutes off the length of the scan. You don't need to give the injection, and you don't necessarily need to have a doctor in the vicinity because you're not injecting anything anymore. And you're left with the first two parts of the scan that comprise the multiparametric MRI. So when we set out after the precision study, the major one that changed practice, to try and find out how we could allow more people to get benefit from MRI, we spoke to patients about whether we should investigate the value of the contrast sequence, the third part, based on the fact that some studies had suggested it may not add too much in terms of cancer detection. And here's one of our patient and public members of our steering group for the PRIME study who supported us going ahead with the study investigating that, which we did before we applied for funding. And we also had a larger study looking at the role of contrast, and patients thought that it was quite important to investigate it. So the PRIME study is an international study. It's carried across 22 centres in 12 countries and 5 continents. We have representation, of course, in the UK as the lead centre, but strong representation from Europe, North and South America, and some centres from Asia and Oceania too. The principle behind the study is that men with suspected prostate cancer who were referred by the general practitioner to the hospital underwent at the hospital the full multiparametric MRI, all 3 parts, but the radiologist reporting the scan was not able to see the contrast sequence, and they declared, based on the first 2 parts, what they thought was wrong with the scan. They were then unblinded and shown the contrast sequence and asked to make the same judgment on the full scan. And we carried out biopsies according to whether or not the short scan or the full scan looked suspicious or not, which allowed us to determine how good the short version and the long version were. And we're really proud of being able to say we've now completed recruitment of this study ahead of schedule, despite it starting around COVID time. And this really is a testament to everyone involved in the study and the patients who were willing to be involved in the first place, because we were asking an important question. And we're also delighted to say we will have the results next week, which we're announcing in an international conference at the European Association of Urology. And hopefully there'll be some coverage of what those results are. And we will, of course, report back to our patient groups to let you know what we find. The implications of the work would be that if the short version without contrast, the biparametric MRI, is as good as the detailed longer version, we can have a shorter, more streamlined scan without an injection, which is going to be better value for money and may allow more scans to be done at the same time, increasing the accessibility of MRI to every man who needs one. So with that, that's the end of my talk. We have our Twitter page, which for those of you who are social media keen can just scan that QR code and have a link to our social media page where we announce news and where the results will be revealed after we present them next week. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and I'll hand over to Simon, who will take us through the Q&A.
Thank you so much. Really, really exciting study, and yeah, looking forward to seeing the results for that. And so we'll move over to the Q&A session now. If you'd like to find out more about this study or about other research that Prostate Cancer UK are funding, we've just put a link in the chat to pages on our website where you can have a look there. We'll try and get through as many questions as we can do in the time that we have. If we don't, then we'll share links in the chat to be able to answer your questions afterwards, either by members of the research team or putting you in touch with our specialist nurses. So we've got a number of questions coming in. So to start us off, I guess thinking about the MRI scan itself, what provisions are there for men that have pacemakers or metal hips that may not be suitable for an MRI scan?
Yeah, so I'm happy to take that. So having metalwork in the body does affect the quality of the imaging you see on an MRI. So, for example, a hip replacement will majorly affect the quality of the scan. However, it doesn't mean you can't have a scan. So particularly with newer pacemakers and newer metalwork, you can still have a scan. We tend to, particularly in our center, we choose a type of scanner to have the scan on, which is less likely to result in the image being blurred. Nonetheless, we do expect the images to not be as good quality as someone who didn't have the metalwork. So in short, you can still have a scan in some cases. It depends on the age of the metalwork you have and exactly what metalwork it is. In the case that you can't have a scan, because the metalwork, for example, contraindicates a scan, then other ways we investigate patients include looking at your PSA value. And say, for example, if it's very high, sometimes we can go to a biopsy without a scan and just biopsy the prostate a bit more thoroughly. And looking forward to the future, there are other imaging modalities which could be investigated, which have shown value in certain studies, but are not necessarily ready for standard of care in the NHS. Examples would include things like PSMA PET.
Super, thank you. And so another question we've had come through is, so is it correct that MRI scans are currently only 80% accurate and hence the need for a biopsy if nothing shows following a high PSA test?
Yeah, so contemporary studies since PROMISE have generally shown that MRI is a bit more accurate than 80%. So we think it's probably closer to the 90% mark, but no test will be perfect. So what I mean by 90% accurate, I mean if the result is negative, you're 90% sure that there is no concerning cancer in the prostate. So we combine that information with other information, such as the patient's PSA relative to their prostate size. And even if you have a negative scan, there's further information from the PSA which can reassure us more. Or it might be that we suggest to the patient they could consider a biopsy if that risk is still high after the negative scan. In terms of if you have a positive scan, not all of the positives on the MRI end up being cancer, which is a major reason for why you need a biopsy. A lot of the suspicious findings on the scan turn out to be not cancer. So the biopsy will confirm whether or not it is for sure. And the information from the biopsy also gives us an idea of the risk of the cancer and what treatments may be appropriate.
I think that partly addresses what leads into another question we've had in is, do you think MRI could ever replace the need for biopsy?
So it's a really interesting question. It's quite topical, I'd say, in the last year or so. So the biopsy information at the moment is standard of care. It tells us the aggressivity of the cancer. If we have a cancer that's not very aggressive, for example, by the Gleason score under the microscope from the pathologist, we can watch those cancers without treating them. If the cancer is more aggressive, it might need surgery or radiotherapy, for example. And in some cases, it may need more advanced treatments than that. So because we base our current treatments on the pathology, it's difficult to say that in any short term, that's likely to change. However, there's a strong interest in investigating it within research. So there have been some series published in journals where patients have had not just the MRI, but other imaging modalities as well. For example, a PET scan combined with that, and have gone on to have treatment without a prostate biopsy. But that's certainly not the standard of care, and is only a concept that should be investigated within studies.
Thank you. I think it's hard to avoid hearing about artificial intelligence, AI. When do you think that might come into play here, and do you think that could be utilized to increase the speed and accuracy of the scans and how we diagnose prostate cancer?
Yeah, maybe Aqua or Alex could take that, and without giving away too much about what we're planning to do, we'll give you away a little bit.
Sure, yeah. So artificial intelligence is a hot topic at the moment. For those of you not too familiar about artificial intelligence or AI, it's essentially the use of a computer program or a computer algorithm to try and do some of the computational work that requires human input at the moment. So a lot of interest is looking at whether we can use computer software or AI algorithms to report MRI scans and help interpret them. And the reason we're very interested about doing this is, as Aqua's mentioned, there is a resource capacity. There are only a certain number of scanners around the country, and if more and more men are needing to get an MRI, there are more and more MRIs that need reporting. And as we know, there are a shortage of doctors and a shortage of radiologists. So there is actually some kind of backlog in getting an MRI. And once you have an MRI, there may be a backlog in getting it reported. So if we're able to develop software that can help expedite this process, then more men who need an MRI can get one, but also more men who need an MRI interpreted can also get one interpreted. We've been busy behind the scenes planning our next study, and we're excited to say that the follow-on study from Precision, from Prime, our next piece of work will be looking to investigate whether we can use AI to help interpret prostate MRIs. And hopefully, if we can prove it to be successful, further down the line, maybe this could be part of standard of care around the world as well, and help expedite this process.
We can reveal the name of the study because we like all studies to
Go on.
in prostate to start with a P. So we've got the study is called Paradigm. So that will hopefully be coming in the near future.
Sounds very exciting, and I'm personally very keen to hear more. So I may pick that up with you afterwards. It sounds really, really exciting. I guess looking at kind of additional ways to utilize MRI. Do you think kind of genetic tests can be combined with MRI and biopsy and PSA information to make prostate cancer diagnosis even better?
Good question. So now the first thing to say is genetic tests aren't routinely used as part of standard of care for risk stratifying patients. Now they are used in other healthcare settings, for example, more commonly in the US. The genetic information can tell us a lot about a patient's cancer risk or cancer if they have it. And sometimes that could be information that's different to the MRI scan. So, I think there's certainly some value in investigating it within clinical studies. As to whether or not it's going to be better than or provide added value to the standard of care, I think that's a research question that needs to be answered, but definitely worthwhile investigating. There are certainly groups of patients in whom genetic testing makes a lot of sense. For example, patients with strong family histories who are very young at diagnosis of prostate cancer, for example. And in some of those patients, if they have certain aberrations of their genes, abnormalities of their genes, their management might change. So in certain groups of patients, it can be valuable, but on the whole, as part of standard of care, we've got a pretty good test, which we know is really good at differentiating between people with or without cancer. And the standard information from the biopsy Gleason grade is also very useful, but definitely we can improve on it. And the balance in terms of how side effects and how successful treatment is quite fine. So we need to make sure we improve on that. And the role of genetics in helping us is certainly something that we should explore further.
Thank you very much. So we've spoken a lot about the role of MRI and following a PSA test to highlight the presence and extent of cancer. Could you perhaps talk a little bit about the use of MRI following treatment, I think particularly sort of radiotherapy, for example, and if or how it might be utilized, or if there's any challenges around using MRI following treatment?
Yeah, so it depends on the treatment. So after radiotherapy, MRI is useful. Now, it's harder to look at scans after radiotherapy because the tissue looks different. So the scans aren't as perhaps clear or crisp or as useful as they were before the treatment. However, after radiotherapy, typically the oncologist who will give the radiotherapy will check the PSA levels. And they'll expect them to fall to a certain degree. And if the PSA continues to rise, that's the stage at which they might consider doing an MRI scan. And if the MRI scan confirms that there is, say, for example, a suspected recurrence, that can help guide a biopsy and subsequent treatment. So it is used post-treatment for radiotherapy. Other newer treatments, such as focal therapy, the MRI after focal therapy is essential, and it's part of the standard follow-up regimen. For things like after surgery, MRI is sometimes useful in looking for recurrence of disease, but primarily we rely on the PSA value itself to determine whether or not we need to go on to, say, do a staging scan, like a PET scan, which is a bit more detailed, looking at the rest of the body too.
Thank you. We've had a couple of questions come in for Alan. If that's the case, we'll bring you in, Alan. Firstly, did you have any symptoms before you had an increased PSA level?
No, I didn't. No, that was something that quite surprised me, because I thought at that time, I thought that anyone with a prostate problem would display symptoms, but clearly we know now that that's not the case.
And another question that's come in. So I think, presumably you had a multiparametric MRI scan as part of the study that you were involved in. How do you feel about having a biparametric MRI now that you've heard all about it?
I'm one of those people that if there is something on offer that is likely to benefit me, then I'll go with it, because the alternative could be so much worse. So any developments with MRIs, I'm happy to go along with, because it proved so very good for me initially.
And I think something that would be a lot quicker as well would be more preferable.
Yeah, well, yeah,
presumably.
and when a procedure like that is faster, then you'll get more men into it. So that in itself is a benefit.
Certainly, yeah, absolutely. We've had a question about the GLIMP study, particularly. So how did the quality of the MRI in the UK compare to the rest of the world?
Alex, do you want to take that?
Sure. So the GLIMP study was a global overview. As we demonstrated in phase 1, the baseline assessment, we demonstrated that only a third of scanners around the world, including the UK, so globally, were of top quality, so P-qual 5 out of 5. If we stratify that by UK centres alone that took part in the study, the proportion of scanners of top quality was just under 2/3. So actually, when we compare the results on a stratified by country basis, it does show that the UK is actually performing quite well compared to the rest of the world. But we also have to appreciate that MRI rollout and the use of MRI might not be as developed as it is, say, in the UK. So that may affect some of the results. And obviously, the only caveat is that the GLIMP study did not look at all UK centres. This was only a selection of centres, so it may not translate nationally.
Yeah, just to add, I think although we took a lot of centres in this, and it's a global study, there are many more hundreds of centres around the world which we didn't include. And the centres wanting to take part in these are generally ones which are self-selected themselves to be slightly better. So maybe the results were slightly biased by that. We know in the UK we're probably world leading in introducing MRI technology and have led most of the major studies in the area. So certainly we have a head start. The NHS is great. We're in a great system that can provide care to many patients, which are free at the point of care. But also we have to recognise the limitations of that, which include the equipment. And let's say, for example, you had a private centre in another country, it's more likely that their imaging and equipment might be newer and of slightly better quality than your average NHS centre. But certainly you do have top quality centres and places within the UK, and understanding the quality of scanners and distribution of scanners in the UK is a priority and something I think we'd like to look into in more detail.
And I guess leading on from that, what is the access like to MRI in the prostate cancer diagnostic pathway across the UK? Does it vary between trusts, between regions? And could biparametric MRI help to address some of those strains that we see?
Good question, Simon. I don't know the answer myself to that question. I think biparametric MRI will increase accessibility for sure. I think we do need to do a study on it. But personally, I think we need to understand there are different types of scanners. You can have different strengths of the magnet, and not just that, they could have been optimized at different times. And within the GLIMP study, we were quite generous. We kind of said the scanner had to be within 10 years of age or have been optimized within 10 years. But honestly speaking, I can't tell you. I know that the state of the equipment around the country. What I can tell you is that I do think there is a lot of variation in the quality of scans around the country. And part of that may be not being aware of standard guidelines to try and improve quality, or not being as conscious that quality can make a difference to how well you detect cancer. And so the work we did in GLIMPS and the paper hopefully will shed some light on what you can do to get your scans better or imaging better. But there is obviously a certain limitation. Let's say you've got a really old scanner and it's not been optimized recently, your image is going to be of poor quality. So I think that message about quality and improvement is really important.
And so what influences the quality of an MRI scan and a scanner?
Yeah, so it's how the protocol, so each of the sequences, so 3 sequences, they're carried out in a certain way. And what Alex showed on GLIMPS is that there are standardized international guidelines for how, for example, how often you should scan after you've given the contrast, for how many minutes, the thickness of the slices and the scans, your field of view, whether you're close up or far away, all those kinds of factors contribute to how good a scan is. And some of those parameters can be quite easily changed. It might just be the centers not aware that they could be optimized. And a lot of work done by my colleagues at UCLH has looked within London about optimizing scanners in the London region. And the work from that has really shown that you can change a lot with some quite simple changes. But obviously, to only a certain extent, there is the question about the equipment, and if it's very old equipment, sometimes you can only improve it to a certain degree. So I think there's 2 aspects there. Some is quite easily improvable, and other aspects might be a bit harder and might just need better equipment.
Okay, thank you. So we mentioned earlier we see an increased risk and an incidence of prostate cancer amongst Black men. Do you think the use of biparametric MRI could help address some of these differences that we're seeing based on ethnicity through improved access, for example?
Yeah, that's also a really topical thing. And one of the things we're trying to do on a national level is make sure that research is applicable to everyone in the population. And what we find is sometimes there are groups who are more likely to take part in trials or seek help, and they're the ones who are most likely to benefit from these kinds of things. And what we want to do is reduce that barrier. So biparametric MRI will be a shorter, less uncomfortable scan because there's no injection, and the patient's not receiving any medication, any injection of gadolinium, which is what you inject. So certainly that might reduce the barrier. I hope it would, but obviously I can't say for sure. But there is a lot of other really good work, outreach work in the community, led by colleagues, for example, at the Marsden, trying to engage with all kinds of the communities to find out the barriers for why people might not be coming forward and trying to reduce those. So I think it's a combination of the tests you offer, but also engaging with those communities and finding out how you can get them to take part. So yeah, a few things there, but a lot of research is going on in that. Another one of my colleagues at UCL, Caroline Moore, is doing some work in that area as well as part of her professorship. So hopefully we can shed more light in the coming years. And
so thinking about PRIME, what sort of men took part in the study? Was there a focus on men that were at higher risk, for example, or was it all comers?
Aqua, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, of course. So we've had 555 men from across the world. We predominantly took men that had a PSA of less than 20 and patients that didn't have a prior MRI and a biopsy. that's like the patients that would, came in, and I think that was quite representative because it was quite broad to the patients that we would expect to see that were first, I guess, presenting. So this was particularly a biopsy naive group of men from every center that took part.
Thank you. There's a question going back to Glimpse here. So have you shared the information on how to improve MRI quality with the other centres and those that weren't involved? So how do you get others to improve the quality of their MRI scans?
Yeah, Aqua or Alex, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so as part of research, one of the important things once the study's completed is disseminating our work, our findings. So one of the things we did is to publish the paper in Radiology, which is one of the leading imaging journals, has a large readership around the world, but also to engage with centres, and we've also presented at numerous conferences globally. So we've done as much work as we can to share our findings with radiologists and neurologists around the world. And in our paper itself, we describe the steps we took, the types of recommendations we made, and all the recommendations we made were in line with international guidelines for prostate MRI. So there was nothing new or wacky techniques that we're introducing. These are all standard procedures that are recommended to be followed. So we've done as much as we can to share these results, and we're going to try and see how well we do over the next few years as well in adhering to these quality standards.
And, as part of the Glimpse study, what we did is when a centre sent us their MRIs, if they weren't top quality, we did directly feed back to them what to do to make them better. And we invited them to submit the images back. And the second part of the study showed how good they got. So we showed that if you do that and you give them feedback, they can improve. I think with many of these things, sometimes a message that you give just has to be repeated again and again. And the paper we published was only towards the end of last year. So usually to impact change on a bigger level, it needs a bit more noise over a longer time period. And certainly national guidelines, there are things called Getting It Right First Time guidelines, which will be coming out for prostate cancer in due course. And I haven't seen what they are, but I'm anticipating they might mention the word MRI quality at least once. Which will be a start. When they're implemented in national guidelines, then people will start to take notice and change practice.
And so with the images that are generated from the MRI scans, do you think they should be shared with the patients?
Good question. Aqua, do you want to take that one?
I'm not 100% sure. I mean, I think, that's a tough question. I think patients should have access to their online records if they're curious. But I think, it needs to be reported first by a professional prior to anything being, given to the patient, just to make sure that any concerns and any queries are taken care of by the, a responsible clinician, so that the patient has like a good shared decision and they understand what's happening. I don't think it should be given without that, clinical information, because I don't think it's wise for images to be given without that important context. I think that's very important.
Maybe Alan might have a view. What do you think from your perspective? Did you have access to the images from your scan, or would you have liked to?
I had access insofar as the the consultant had them displayed for me when I had the consultation with him. It never crossed my mind that I'd like a copy or be able to access it, because, I mean, these guys are the experts. They know what they're looking at. We just see a picture. You can see something, but it could be completely irrelevant to what it is you think you're looking at.
We've had another question for you, Alan. So you mentioned that following your diagnosis, you chose to have brachytherapy. What was your reasoning behind choosing that form of treatment?
When I looked at the various treatments available to me, I considered brachytherapy to be the one with the fewest side effects. and it was also the treatment that seemed to be the easiest to overcome. The recovery following brachytherapy was better than it was for the other treatments on offer. And that was my experience. I did have side effects, but they didn't last as long as the side effects from some other treatments that other people have had that I'm aware of. So that was it, really. It was the other thing is that I went into hospital at 7 o'clock in the morning. I was in the operating theatre at 9 o'clock. I left at 6 o'clock the following morning, and I've never been back since. The only consultation I had following the treatment was telephone conversations with nurse specialists, and of course having my PSA checked on a regular basis so that we could discuss it during the conversations.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's so important that the treatment decision is right for the
individual. Absolutely.
Case.
Yeah.
So we've had another question, and you've maybe kind of alluded to this about your future plans, and when we spoke about artificial intelligence, but I guess what is the next steps? Are there any other adjustments that could be made to MRI to make them even better at diagnosing prostate cancer?
Yeah, well, look, the good news is there's lots of exciting stuff going on. And one of my colleagues at UCL, Shonit Punwani, is a professor of radiology who's developed novel sequences. So as we discussed the 3-part versus the 2-part MRI, as part of the diffusion weighted images, which is one of the first 2 main parts, there are different ways you can do that. And he's introduced a different way of doing that, and novel sequences too, which are being investigated in trials. And the results look quite promising. So, for example, it may even be possible to go, obviously depends on the results of what we show with Prime, but if, say, for example, a shorter version is just as good, you can then introduce a new sequence in a short version, and you might have, an even better MRI scan. So yeah, for sure, there are different ways of doing the MRI which we can improve on standard of care with.
Thank you. And so how realistic could it be to use MRI in screening for all men, like you have mammograms in breast cancer?
Yeah, also very topical. The reason why we'd consider doing that is we've shown now from the last 10 years worth of data that MRI is probably one of the best tools at picking up cancer that we have. And so the next logical step is to say, if you have a screening program in healthy patients, like you have with mammograms with females with suspected breast cancer, you could do it in healthy patients between a certain age group, say 50 to 65, and you invite them to have an MRI scan or a PSA. And if the MRI is abnormal, they could go on to have biopsies. So the question is, how realistic is it? I think it's very realistic that, we should consider this, and it will be considered as part of a big trial, which I believe is in the process of being discussed, called Transform, and also in Europe in a big screening study there, funded by EU Horizon 2020 money. So there is work that's ongoing to investigate whether a screening, like an organized population screening of healthy patients with MRI, is of value. But there are also many challenges of implementing a big national program. So other ways in which a screening test is evaluated include things like, is it feasible to deliver that screening test across the country to so many people? And what do the results mean? Is it likely to improve survival in the long term? And those are unanswered questions which will probably be answered by the big trial.
That's right. And there have been a couple of studies, I think Reimagine and Program, that have looked at that at smaller scale. So really needs to be tested at a larger scale, national scale. So moving on to other questions, we've got might be a slightly controversial one, but we'll see. Should the quality of the MRI scans at different hospitals be published so that people can make informed choices as to where they get their scans?
Yeah, also a really good question. I mean, personally, I'm, as well as being a doctor, I'm a user of healthcare services, and I would like to have the choice to be able to go where I want for my treatment or investigations, just as any other patient would want to. And I think the issue is, first of all, knowing what the quality is. And I think that's the big challenge, because it's only been something we've introduced recently, looking at the quality of scans. So knowing what the quality is and then being able to choose as a patient is, to me, not a bad thing, but it's the process of being able to evaluate things. And as I said, I think it, rather than necessarily driving patients from, one part of the country to another, you'd want these good quality scans to be available locally, wherever you are. So I think that the emphasis should be on assessing quality with view for quality improvement locally, so it's convenient for patients wherever they live.
Thank you. And so if the results of the PRIME study are positive, how long would it take for biparametric MRI to enter practice?
Yeah, so there's different things to consider. One is standard of care is already the 3-part, so dropping 1 part is not that difficult. You just have to change what you do on a day-to-day basis. But the real point to emphasize here is the quality control phase of PRIME, which Alex went through. And we did optimize the images and scanners before the study started, which basically means whatever the conclusions are of the study will be relevant to scanners and quality of imaging, which is good. So what we need to make sure of is whether or not, the quality of other centers where the imaging quality might not be so good is applicable. And we can only generalize our results to the type of scans that we had in the study. And although it's a big study, 500 patients, we should just be very cautious that, if we do say go to biparametric MRI, that the quality of imaging being done with only 2 parts is good, to make sure you've got a good 2 parts.
Thank you. We are quickly running out of time. I think we've got time for just one last question. And Alan, I think you have the honours here for you to answer this one. So the question is, which of the diagnostic tests that you had did you find the most invasive or challenging? How did they compare?
Well, when I had my the MRI scan was fine. The only thing I didn't like about the MRI scan was they were playing some nice music that I liked and then switched it off. But up to that point, now everything was fine with that. In terms of the biopsies, because I was on the trial, I was under general anaesthetic when both biopsies were done. So now I understand that the biopsies are more frequently done on a local anaesthetic. So I've heard men comment about the exposure side of things rather than anything else, which they find slightly embarrassing, perhaps. But what's the alternative? With regards to the period following the biopsies, I only ever had bruising around the perineum and the testicles. I didn't have any discomfort, no pain. There was no sign of any infection. Everything was very good as far as I was concerned.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan. I'm going to need to draw questioning to a close there. So thank you all for your time. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Veeru, Aqua, and Alex. It's been really, really interesting, really, really insightful. And thank everyone for attending this webinar. Just a few bits I'd like to make in closing, if I may. Firstly, we've tried to answer as many questions as we can do. If there are any that we haven't got to, I'm really, really sorry about that. Hopefully we'll include links in the chat to where you can direct those questions either to our research team to answer or to our specialist nurses. So thank you for joining us, and thank you also for those that have donated and supported the charity over the years. We really couldn't have done this without you, and we are so grateful, particularly those that have left gifts in their wills. It's extremely generous donation to do that, and it's really important for us as a charity to offer that long-term sustainable source of income to support the research and the good work that you've just heard about, and it makes up actually 25% of the overall income of the charity, so it's a really, really important source for us. If you'd like to hear more about the work that we do, and more in general, you can very much sign up to our course journey, and there should be a link provided there. And we do have a couple of feedback polls quickly, if we may. Really, firstly, just to know a little bit more about our audience so that we can help shape future webinars to you, and also hear about how you found today. So the first poll has just popped up. So if you can please answer that, I'll be most appreciated. And the second poll that we have, which will come up shortly, which we focus around how you found today's webinar. Also worth mentioning that after the webinar, there'll be an email which will be sent around and provide an opportunity for further feedback and thoughts. So you should receive that shortly. So once we've completed the second feedback poll, there we go, I think that's gone. So all that's left for me to say is just thank you again so much for spending your evening with us, and we very much do appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evenings. Thank you.